I would like to present our lecturer, Yin Li from Wuling University. He is professor of School of International Relations and Global Affairs from Wuling University. He also is the associate director of Shanghai Center for Innovation and Governance, and he just wrote a book titled Climate Life for Technology Frontier, Indigenous Innovation in the High-Tech Industry. Thank you for being here.
Okay. Thank you, Chilu, for your warm introduction. I'm very happy to come to Brazil after 30 hours of flight. And thank you for flying me over. I'm very happy to meet all of you guys in this wonderful summer school. Actually, this is the third summer school I have taught on Global South. So I think this is a very interesting time and a very important topic I guess everyone is interested in. So a little bit more about myself. I'm an economist trained, I think it's called industrial economics, where I'm mainly looking at issues like technological innovation, industrial policy, and that kind of stuff. Of course, I'm going to talk about China today. The title I'm going to talking about is called China's innovation model. I'm going to give you guys a brief introduction about Chinese model, but I want to spend a bit more time to discuss some of the consequences, implications, especially from a global south perspective. Okay, I want to start by asking you guys this question. What would be the first thing that comes to mind when you think of innovation in China, or do you think it's even associated? Yes? Payment systems, okay. Yes. What? DeepSeek, okay. AI, okay, cool. High-speed rails, cool. Yes. Robots, okay. That's what I'm trying to show you. This is the so every spring we have this sort of big national celebration called Spring Festival Gala. So this year we have this is a bunch of robots dancing along with human. This is something you guys are probably going to see a lot more later. This is, I don't think you have seen that. This is a solar farm in a shape of a panda. It's very cute. Looks like Kung Fu Panda, right? Now we have built hundreds of, maybe dozens or hundreds in the Gobi Desert part of China, which just just looking at the chart, the renewable energy in China now is adding a very rapid speed. Something I don't think you guys have known is that the number just came in last week is the country's electricity consumption and generation in months in July, which is 1.02 trillion kilowatts. It's the first nation that have that record number in just 1 month. If you want to have an idea how much that is, it's basically the electricity consumption of the whole ASEAN country. ASEAN country is the Southeast Asian countries with over 700 million people. That's their annual consumption. Well, you guys might want to know what is that was bragging about. Not completely. You may also wonder, well, what is the largest source of consumption? Is it because it's summer? It's very hot. There's a lot of air conditioning. Well, that's part of the reason. In fact, the largest growth in electricity consumption, over 20% in China, is actually from agriculture. Okay, so basically the idea is that you can get that. We build a lot of renewable energy, and they are being used to combat climate change, which I think is something maybe worth to thinking about. And it's a model that how you combat climate change through growth, which is probably one way that the Chinese are trying to do. So now I'm starting with something a little bit more academic. So this is the graph that a lot of the economists have been obsessing with over the last 20 years. Basically, this is the number of patents, total number of patents by any nation. By China, Japan, the United States, and Korea and Germany from 1991 to 2021. Okay, you can see that the number of patents have been historically dominated by Japan and the United States, which is the line here and here. And China overtook everyone at around 2012. Okay, and now the total number of patents annually filed in China is about 3 times than the next biggest one, which is the United States. Okay. Well, this is an interesting graph, just like everyone that when we talk about China, it's large, right? But there's a lot of but it's an interesting thing that it's very hard to explain, okay? People explain many different ways. There's like tons of economics paper on that. We recently wrote one, but that was not the point I'm trying to say here. Traditionally people explain that with this is a lot of there's a lot of R&D expenditure. China now have like a legal system, very pro patents and things like that. In our paper, we also talked about the political factors. What I want to talk about today is actually not just this phenomenon. I want you guys to think about it a bit. What is a pattern, right? So in some of the sessions this morning I heard from, which is kind of a common sense, is a lot of people are just thinking about pattern means, you guys have a lot of innovation, have a lot of knowledge. But is that so? Because I study these, so I want to talk about this a little bit. So this is what a pattern look like. This is American pattern, so it's in English, so we can understand. So basically, it has a bunch of information about who owns it, who was the inventor. Usually, the business with patent is that it's usually invented by the inventor are individuals. In this case, it's a bunch of engineers in lives in California. But the patent is owned by Apple. Okay, the people who invent them do not own them. The company owns them. Okay, so it's a property rights. Okay, this is an American patent, like this is a Chinese patent. In addition to the patent paperwork, we actually give you a cute little certificate that you can show off to everyone. It's very the Chinese way. So what I'm trying to tell here is what is a patent? Okay, a patent is a lot of things. Okay, it's a codified in the economics innovation, we call it a codified form of knowledge. Okay, so it's something that can be written down, but that's not only the only way, only form of knowledge. You can also have knowledge that's within humans' minds that cannot be easily expressed. We call it tacit knowledge. Actually, tacit knowledge could be a lot more important than codified knowledge. But anyway, pattern is one form of knowledge. It's basically a property rights that's created by the state, okay, by the government, to give people incentivize, basically saying that by you fulfilling this pattern with the government, now we're going to give you some protection, okay? Protection of what? Protection of making money solely out of that, all right? So it's in a way it's similar to, for example, I own this phone, right? But I don't need a certificate, right? Because it's obvious. But a piece of knowledge that needs some kind of a certificate from the government to create deliberately a property rights. Okay, it's not even a one-to-one measure of innovation. Okay, the patent can be very good, very important, and it can also sucks with very little knowledge there. The point I'm trying to make here, sorry, I don't know why, is that okay, uh, is that patent is actually a creation, a legal creation, okay, based on a myth. A myth that is a patent actually gonna incentivize innovation, okay. Well, there's a very long history of patents dating back to Venice, the Republic in the 15th century. And for almost 500 years, nobody really paid a lot of attention to that. In addition to a few, laws probably in the Great Britain, okay, it becomes something that people think is important until the late 1980s. Okay? Basically, because of two things. One thing is that the U.S. industry was under a lot of competition from Japan and Germany. They are not losing competition on important markets like automobile, like electricity. And basically then a bunch of congressmen in the US come together and says, well, we have a lot of knowledge invested by the US government. We're going to make money out of that. We're going to use that to strengthen our industry. So basically the US only began to strengthen a patent law by the 1980s. Okay? And then they try to do that over the world through rounds of WTO negotiations, through trips. That's the time, only by the time patent becomes something important in the national trading system. At the same time, there's a neoclassical economist. His name is Douglas Boss. You guys probably heard of him. He wrote a book. He won the Nobel Prize because he wrote a book called The Rise of the Western World. I don't know if you have read that. It's very hard to read because he's very bad. Okay, but the book has been become a sort of a neoclassical Bible by the 1990s because he says how the Brits become the first industrial power. He says because the Britain have a patent law which was called the Statute of the Monopolies in 1624 that creates incentives for the Brits to innovate. Okay, this is all the myths around the patents created by in the 1980s and become a lot more popular in China. Well, China didn't really have a patent law until 1984 after the reform. But the point is that, now if you're looking at the per capita base on the number of patents, this is a graph. You can see here. There's a solid line up here, which is a high income world, okay, and then there is the dot line here down here, which is the low income and the mid income countries, and then there's something in between, which is China. So historically, patent has never been very important for development, okay, and then there's China. Okay, so what do you make of China? So I had this presentation for two different audience. So usually the response of a which probably mean Anglo-Saxon economist or a colleague from Europe or America would say, well, that means China is a rich country already. I mean, well, I don't think so. At least not there yet. But that actually, I think, tells us something about the Chinese development thing. Okay, it's always a theme. I want to go back a little bit later. How do you interpret the China innovation boom and what's the consequences, what's the implications, right? This is a long start, but I want to starting from this, discussing from this point. So the most important thing I think I want to raise from all this, the story I just mentioned is that China is in contrary to many prevailing narratives, especially from the American propaganda, that China breaks rules and things like that. China is perhaps a status quo power, actually, which I will criticize. Okay, which is meaning that I think China's development is following too much rule that's set by the global laws, and there is something we could change. Okay, and what is actually underscoring Chinese development, which I'm going to describe in detail more, is that I think it's actually the socialist institution and the massive state capacity that is underscoring the Chinese innovation model. That has not been correctly understood outside of China. So China has been often accused as a rule breaker. I guess you guys have been hearing these stories a lot. If you go to New York Times, the Economist, these days you're gonna basically say, China is stealing intellectual property from the West. Is using unfair protectionist policies, a lot of Chinese subsidies, unfair things like that. Okay, so this is a screenshot from Foreign Affairs, one of sort of like very well known magazine by this guy called Michael Froman, who is the president of the Council on Foreign Relations in the U.S. The title of the article is China has already remake the international system. Okay, so this basically this guy wrote in kind of a grievance. Okay, you have a kind of rule-based free trading international system before China, and China came in, we break the rules, we get some development. I'm gonna show you this is not true. Okay. Another narrative you're gonna see a lot, you have seen a lot, is saying China is a state capitalism. Okay, we're using a lot of the protectionist measures, like a lot of subsidies. For example, you have this horrible Leninist state that's now you compete on the market, which is actually also not true. Okay, what is true is that historically, first of all, rich nations have all ignored and stealed intellectual properties. Okay, you can read that very easily, but the example here is you can see the U.S. Refused to recognize foreign copyrights until 1891. Okay, and granted patents freely to domestic inventors while allowing the imitation of British manufacturing techniques. It only began to harmonize with global standards in 1950s when the U.S. was the victory winner of the World War II and had the largest manufacturing sector in the world and is a net export, innovation export. Germany became Europe's industrial Paris in the late 19th centuries, copying British textile and steel innovations without compensation. It only strengthens patents after it catching up to the Brics in the 1890s. Japan and South Korea also in the post-World War development, they promoted state-backed reverse engineering of foreign technology. They only tightened the IP in the 1990s and 2000s under the TRIPS pressure, which is basically because the U.S. now trying to make money out of its own patents. There's a lot of similar stories. You guys are probably familiar with Hudson classical book about kicking away the matters. So if you think about the contrast, in contrast, China has filed a lot more patents when it was a developing country. Okay, that the goal is probably not to steal, okay, but to protect itself from this regime. Or if you want to looking at the high tariffs, okay, this is it's the rich countries that use high tariff to protect their infinite industries. This is the U.S. tariff graphs for the last 200 years, okay. So you can see that in the 1820s, the U.S. tariff, average tariff was as high as 60%, even as close as in the 1930s when we have the Sul-Sul tariff. That's also a very high tariff time. And it's also the rich countries that continue to practice industrial policy. This is a recent paper by a bunch of actual neoclassical economists trying to using basically sort of big data methods to mine which countries having industrial policy. And I think to their own surprise, they find that, well, first of all, there's increasing use of industrial policy. And most of them are used by rich countries, not the poor ones, as many people would have believed. Okay. In contrast, if you're looking at China's trade barrier, this is World Bank data, okay, it's not from me, is actually quite low. Okay, it's about the average tariff in 2016 is about is less than 4.4%. Okay, lower than South Korea, which is a rich country. Okay, and Brazil, Argentina. This is a bit of a different development model. And obviously will be lower than the U.S. Okay, after liberation, stable, confident, shoot the U.S. tariff to the sky. And now China has been used as an excuse for the rich countries to reuse industrial policy. This is Wall Street Journal title. Industrial policy is bad. You know, waste the dust off an old idea to come to China. This is Biden. This is Trump. The interesting thing part here is that while the United States, American government saying that, well, now because China subsidized a lot of its industries, so it's legitimate for the U.S. to do that too. But prominent economists, even American ones, saying, well, you are not learning the right lessons from China. Dan Roderick is a Harvard economist who has been studying IP for a long time. He's basically said, he says, this is his slide, he said China's industrial policy is more than subsidies, or which is trying to tell the US government. Jonas Nam is another, he was a senior economist for the Biden administration. He's probably similar age than me. He says US IP is not learning from China, okay? Why? Because, well, now I'm trying to give you an overview of what I think how China actually did in creating an innovation model. I summarize that in 4 points. One is that it's a socialist system, well, okay, but embrace a lot of the capitalist competition and environmentalism. On the center of that is a central government, very strong in terms of strategic planning, but with a lot of experimentation that have to do with China's unique political structure, which I'll kind of comment in a few minutes. There's a lot of government support and to some extent subsidies too, but I don't think the subsidies are even important. But there's also a lot of competition in China, which I call it dual competition. One competition is a market, the other competition is a political competition. That create a economic and an innovation system open to to competition, open to foreign investment and competition, but with some of the unique characteristics of the market, its segregation, its tiers of incomes, its different regions that create some kind of layers of protection and for the domestic industry actually to grow and to innovate. That would be my key points today. So first of all, I want to give you guys a crash course for like 2 minutes to understand China's political system. It's going to be very hard. But the interesting point I'm trying to make is that this current system in China actually bears a lot of the legacy from the early socialist, especially Mao Zedong's region. So first of all, the Chinese political system is a system with very strong local agency. Okay, I put it in this graph. Okay, I understand it's very hard to understand, but I'm trying to give you a 1 minute class. So in the West, China is often characterized as a authoritarian region, right? But if you're looking at China, it's a very interesting system. The system has basically two kind of parallel systems. In Chinese, we call it qiao qiao huang huang. What does that mean? It means that we have one vertical system that works from the central to local. So for example, the education system works with Ministry of Education, and you have a provincial education bureau, education department at a city level. Okay, so they have a kind of vertical commanding system. But on the same time, we also have a horizontal system, which is within the provincial or the city level or even the central level. All these departments have to be led by the regional leadership, which usually is a dual leadership. One is the governor at the provincial level. The other is the party secretary, the communist party secretary. Okay, so this is a system very unique. It is because the vertical system announced some form of central planning, while the horizontal system, the regional system, announced local agency. Okay, so the city or the province bosses, if you call that way, have to compete with each other. They are not only going to answer to their supervisor in Beijing, okay, they also have to compete with other provinces in terms of their in terms of their performance. How this system come to play, it's very is basically because when China trying to implement a central planning system in the 1950s, basically following Soviet Union, Mao Zedong was suspicious of this system. Okay, he says, well, we can't just have all the power with a very powerful bureaucracy in Beijing. We have the people the power. What the actual way is that the local agent government gets a lot of power, which by the way is also a tradition in Chinese empires over the centuries. So we have this system that's working for the locals, but also have to answer to the center. That now a lot of competition between the local governments, which is a point I'm gonna come into later. And the second most important socialist tradition is that there's in favor of mass education, especially literacy level all over the country, because the socialist system regard getting educated is a basic right for everyone, even if you are in a very remote and poor area of China. I'm going to show you some data later. And finally, that emphasize on local, regional agency and education. One of the results is that we created a massive rural market which was reinforced in the 1980s in the land reform. Chinese have had several rounds of land reform since the revolution. In the beginning, we gave all the lands to the poor farmers from the rich. That was a communist revolution. But by the 80s, the states basically gave the land back to farmers again, trying to and have created a very rather equal society. That's actually industrialization history in East Asia. The land reform has always been a very important. In the case of China, that creates a rural market that become actually still quite important today. I'll go into that point later. Okay, so on the point of mass education, I want to show the data a little bit by comparing China and India. So you can see that this is the schooling at different levels between compare China and India from 1980s to 2010. You can see that basically China has always been done very well in terms of eliminating literacy, okay, and provide some basic educations to the mass. In 1980s, 40% of the population have some elementary education, okay. Only about a third of the Chinese population have no schooling. If you compare to India at the time, they have 70% of no schooling. But India have done significantly better in terms of higher education. In 1980, India have 2.5% of the population already have higher education, while China, the percentage is really, really low. Okay, China didn't catch up with India in higher education until 2010, to your surprise. Okay, but China has always been doing extremely well in terms of providing elementary school education and high school education to the mass, which is mandatory and which actually takes a lot of efforts. Basically, the government have to send people to the poorest part of the country to providing the basic education. It become later much more important when China trying to develop manufacturing. You need a lot of semi-skilled worker, but also it's important in creating a domestic market, which has been, I think, the most important thing in local industry. So how do Chinese government plan? Okay, this is a little bit giving some of the basic ideas. The government, we have long-term planning for 15 years. So for example, so some of the most important long-term planning we had in the 21st century is in 2006. The government made a 15-year plan called, which was a very boring name, called the medium and long-term science and technology planning. That document is widely known outside of China. It's basically the start of Chinese indigenous innovation planning. Basically, in that document, government says, we find that the development of China in the 1990s depends too much on foreign development, FDI. So we want to have a innovative domestic industry in the next 15 years, and then the government actually implemented that. Then for some of these important sectors, for example, education, there's really a 10 years plan. For example, digitalization was through a 10-year planning. And then there's a plan for implementation and so on. This planning has been coupled with a lot of the experiment. The famous saying is that crossing the river by hitting the stone. What it actually means is that when the government makes this huge long-term planning, okay, it's more about setting the goals, development, and the locals, because of the agency I just talked about, have a lot of chance to try and error, to discover, and to to have policy feedbacks to experiment which would be the best way to actually realize the goal. That creates a lot of that could actually create a lot of confusion in the system, but it's also have being able to motivate the local agents. This is the case, I think the famous case, as I mentioned, of China's long-term planning success is probably the railway system. Today, this is the whole nation's railway network. Actually, this is a little old. I think there's more. There's about 42,000 kilometers in total, of course more than the rest of the world combined. And then you can see that this is actually built only in 20 years, okay? This is a bit small, but in 2008, you can see here, it's basically only 3, okay, highways. The most important one, the one between Shanghai and China, didn't build until 2011, okay? So basically the first 10 years is trial and error, and then the government decided to just build it for the whole country. And that's a system. This is a graph I showed you just a few minutes ago. But the point I trying to make here is that there's a more than subsidies in the whole in this whole China's industrial policy. They will there are government VCs, there are local R&D and so on. I'll talk this a little bit more if I have time. We'll talk about a few cases. The interesting key thing here is that while people in the U.S. emphasize these subsidies provided by the government, the more critical part is perhaps about how these government support are actually being implemented. Okay, it's very easy for government to waste money, just like any big organizations. Big business waste money, big government waste money. The China's main role, main way of disciplining these investment through what I call the dual competition. So one competition is a political competition. Okay, the local government that, because of the structure I just talked about, need to show they have results from these government investment. Okay, so they're going to invest in local firms, and those firms will have to compete on a very cutthroat regional market to survive. Okay, so the market competition coupled with this political competition actually was in China a lot more important in terms of the subsidies government provided to the industry. Because of the structure, so we can have an economy that's actually very open to foreign investment and to foreign competition, while at the same time that the local industry have a way to grow. This is what I call the market segregation in China. Okay. Here I'm showing that from the automobiles. Okay, this is the extractors. Okay, so in China, this construction machinery, you can have a multiple markets, even it's just construction materials. Okay, you can have a low quality, lower price one. You also have the higher quality, higher price one. Okay, so China's open to foreign competition would invite foreign companies to enter, usually through the high quality, high price one, typically in large cities like Beijing and Shanghai, who can afford these expensive foreign things. But there's also a large rural Chinese market that have a lot of demand, even though they only can afford a low price. Okay, so in China, this has always been a market that's held by local firms. I don't know if you guys heard about there's this Chinese app called Pinduoduo in China. It also has a American what American corporate operation that sells extremely cheap goods to mostly to the Chinese rural markets. So what happened in China often is that you have the foreign firms enter through the more high-end sector, and then the local firms holding the no price segment, and then you have a middle class market in the middle that everyone trying to compete for. Okay, the dynamic is usually that the foreign firms now trying to lower their price by localize their production, and then the local firms trying to upgrade by going into the higher price market. And at that point, it would become a sweet point for the competition, for the upgrading of the domestic industries. Okay, and that's actually, and some of you might know Chinese, and this is a very famous slogan during the revolution by Chairman Mao. It means surrounding the cities from the countryside. It turned out this was the key to Chinese revolution success, because the Communist Party basically started everything from the rural area in the Civil War and so on, and it also becomes the strategy for Chinese companies to compete in the market. Huawei started from selling telecom equipment to the rural side. Xiaomi is starting not to rural, but to their initial market is recent graduate. People who started working to sell them affordable smartphones, and it becomes kind of sort of like a bubble, business Bible in China. How you succeed in Chinese market. I would like to, using maybe, I'm running out of time. I'm trying to give Gus a little bit more time to discuss a case study of electric vehicles, which is probably now some of the things people outside of China are really interested in. This is the BYD Seagull that's being very popular outside of China. Professor Antonio Diego. The first time he visited China, he asked me about this car. He says, well, this car the Seagull is so cheap in Brazil. Are you guys saying that, kind of dumping in Brazil, right? So I tell him, you just go and look at how much it sells in China. And then a few days back, he tells me, oh, Seagull is even cheaper in China, so we are making more money by selling that to Brazilians, twice the price. Then I told him, well, Seagull is not even the cheapest. The cheapest EV and the best-selling EV in China is from a car company you guys never heard of. It's Wuling minivan. So Wuling is a joint venture. Well, what does that mean? So it's a joint venture between a local firm called Wuling, which is a state-owned company, with a joint venture with Shanghai GM, which is also joint venture. So it's a bit complicated, but anyway, so it's a local firm with about a fourth joint venture. It created this mini electric vehicle, something like that, which is about half the size of an actual car. It's the best-selling EV in China. It sold 1.1 million units over the years for a cost of 30,000 RMB, which is $4,200 US. That's probably the cheapest EV in the world, namely to the rural markets. So this is actually where the Chinese companies start from. It's not even the higher price cars that people assume it's subsidized by the government. So if you're looking at this is a brief history of this how this industry is developing. It's actually come out of government R&D, dating back to as early as 2001. Okay, the main rationale for the Chinese government to fund EV research was twofold. One is that it's beginning to realize by that time that it's very hard to catch up with the traditional car manufacturers because of all these barriers and so on. And the other is because of energy security. Okay, so the government funds a lot of the research in actually also in like fuel cells, in hydrogen and so on. And most of those R&D programs failed. Okay, it didn't really produce anything. The only important outputs from those R&D programs are the people trained. Okay, those people trained by 2009 have begun to either joining existing companies or beginning to starting their own companies. By 2009, partly because of Tesla's already have a successful commercialization of the EV cars, the Chinese government decided to implement various pilot experiments among cities, which has also become an opportunity for cities to compete with each other. That local government began to provide support for local EV makers, infrastructure, and so on. It's also the same time a bunch of companies that you are seeing begin to start. For example, NIO, XPeng, Ni Auto. They are very innovative, but they are also very private. They are private companies. By 2016, the government decided to allow Tesla become the first wholly foreign-owned company to enter China. The main purpose is also to have Tesla to compete with local companies to allow them to make the local companies better. Basically, between 2016 and 2023, the government decided that we have enough firms and they are competing each other, they are learning from each other. Important theme is that there's also the COVID. At that time, briefly, everyone was shutting up. China is shut off from the world. The government decided that we have kept the industry going without disruption from the pandemics. Now we should withdraw. By 2023, the subsidies have been gradually rolled back from in the Chinese market. The main benefits, the main subsidies you can have that in China is if you buy EV, it's easier to get a license. You probably doesn't have an idea is that in a city like Beijing or Shanghai, it's extremely hard to get a car license. You have to get that through lottery and all these things. If you're trying to get a gasoline car, but if you buy an EV, it's still much easier to get a license. But the main point here is that by 2023, okay, there's no more subsidy for this industry. So the idea I think you want to see is that all these institutions I just mentioned have played a role in China's EV industry. Not just the subsidies that have been, characterized by the West. This is a graph which shows basically China have the largest EV market sales and market shares globally. Okay. All right, I'm gonna skip this a little bit. If you are interested in my book, I have a few more interesting case studies about telecom and semiconductors, but I don't have time. So in the end, I'm trying to raise a few interesting questions, also answering some of the things I talked in the beginning. So let's looking at this graph again, right? China's patents per capita now is more than which country's averages, which shows China is making a lot of investment in R&D to become innovative. But it also shows that China is willing to following the rules that's set by the rich countries, which is a point I think we should criticize by creating so much of the IPs, because the current world IP system is not just, okay? The current world innovation system is not just at all. This is the data, not connected by me, but by some of the WIPO economists, showing who is charging the patent royalty, basically the fees from patent, and who is getting the from that. You can see that most of the in 2000s, most of the patents income were coming from high income countries, and a little bit from mid. About 90% is from high income countries. About 10% in total from mid income countries. Basically, there's no patent royalty from low income countries. Okay, and then those money basically goes all to high income countries, 99.1%. By 2020, okay, very close to now, that patent income from high income countries dropped to about 77%. Now about more than 20% of the revenue from patents are coming from mid-income countries. Okay, and that money still goes to where? Goes to high-income countries. Okay, so basically the world patent system we have implemented now is a tool, okay, for rich countries to extract, especially from industrializing middle-income countries, to the global north. And I would say China should challenge this system, should break the rules. This guy said China has already been making international system. I hope that's true, but which is not. Which is not. There were previous challenges to the international IP system. For example, India have banned all foreign pharmaceutical IPs. Brazil trying to do that in the 80s, but they have not been very successful, to be honest, because that doesn't really change how things been done globally. Now China really is in a unique position. We have a much stronger industrialized base. While even China were willing to follow the rule, it has been turned against by the rich countries. There are American congressmen trying to abandon all Chinese patents in the U.S. Because when the things don't work for them, they don't like it, right? So it's really, I think it's really important to establish a new international order that's conducive to knowledge transfer, to capacity building, to learning and innovation in the global south. And how should you do that? Well, my radical proposition will be banning all patents. This is why, am I crazy? Well, economists have all known for a very long time. Patents only works a little bit in pharmaceutical industry. Pharmaceutical industry is the only industry that claims that they actually need patents. In almost all other industries, patents have been used as a tool for creating barriers for competition, extracting grants, especially from your competitors, especially for the middle-income countries. And if you're looking at the renewable industry, right, we talk about it in the morning, basically the cost of renewable energy has been brought down by China alone, and by learning and by a lot of investment. Okay, it's not by creating a lot of money making intellectual property by patents. No, it's not useful. It's the investment and the learning that has been always been the crucial parts of innovation. And if that's the only lesson that we should learn from Chinese innovation system, I think that would be that lesson. Okay, that's what I wanted to talk today, and I'm happy to take questions.